Hello, welcome back to this week's episode of Closed by Mo. My name is Mohammed. I'm hopefully your favorite YouTube host on most things real estate. I'm also a real estate investor and a broker based out of New York City. And in this week's episode, you can see that I'm actually in my new office here in New York. I hope you guys maybe enjoy the new view, although the background looks really similar, because I am having a blast here, especially because I'm happy to announce that I'll be hiring my first ever employee who will be starting in just a couple of days. And I can't wait to I'm just really excited to how hopefully efficient things are going to be getting, because as you can probably imagine, one person doing all these different things can get really time consuming. Now, in this week's episode, we're going to talk about something that's a little bit of an eyebrow raiser, which is what happens when a landlord is being foreclosed on, and are the tenants still liable for rent, and who are they even liable for rent to, especially if the landlord's in foreclosure. Without further ado, let's jump right into this video, but I do have a quick disclaimer to make. That is, I am not an attorney, I'm not a financial advisor, I'm not a tax planner, I'm not a judge, I'm none of these people. I'm just a real estate broker, and as a real estate broker, I have dealt with a couple of these scenarios firsthand, both from the tenant side and the landlord side. And the reason why I'm making this video is because this is something that was asked to me a couple of weeks ago, and I figured, you know what? This might be something that's really entertaining and useful for folks to know that might be a landlord that may be facing foreclosure, God forbid, or maybe a tenant who are living in a current house or a property where they find out that the landlord is facing foreclosure. So who knows? Maybe this video will be useful for you. Let's jump right into it. Now I'm going to restart the video with that same exact disclaimer that I made at the end of the introduction, which is, look, I'm not an attorney. I am not a landlord eviction attorney. I'm not a tenant eviction attorney. I'm not a bank attorney. I'm not any attorney in whatsoever in any legal capacity. I'm a real estate broker. The reason I'm talking about stuff like this is because these things are relevant for my clients that are both landlords and tenants. So I'm hoping if you ask me about a question similar to this, and you're watching this video because you're finding use from it, I hope you don't take this as legal advice, and I'll try to stay very impartial here. But again, just as a reminder, this is by no means any legal, financial, or tax advice, anything of that stuff. I'm a real estate broker. If you have questions and you need to get in touch with people like that, please let me know. I have, my network is your network. I'm happy to tap in. Now, to answer the first question, I think, which is really important to clarify. What exactly is foreclosure, and what does it really mean for the landlord? Foreclosure is effectively something that a bank will start the process of, or effectively start the foreclosure process on a particular homeowner or property owner or a big landlord, small landlord, doesn't matter, if that landlord or that owner has missed a handful of payments on their mortgage process. Now, this means it could be different things for different people in different states, at least in America here. So for example, some states might say, okay, if you miss 30 days or if you miss 60 days, the bank is already going to start the foreclosure process. Other states will say, hey, if you miss 180 days, then the bank will start the foreclosure process, which is basically 6 months or so. So different states approach it differently, and banks know this as well. Sometimes in a lot of, I would say, difficult states, banks might even have to drag on the process for multiple years. For example, in New York State, I know the foreclosure process can be dragged out for multiple years because I've worked with clients that have been in those scenarios where either the landlord is being foreclosed on or the owner themselves has worked with me and has told me, look, I'm being foreclosed on. I haven't made a single payment in 2 years, or almost coming up 2 years now. Again, the reason I share that is because, number one, it depends state by state, whichever state you're in. I practice in New York State, New York City specifically, and it also depends on how far back you are in your payments. Obviously, the first step for most banks isn't going to be, hey, you missed a payment, we're going to start the foreclosure process. A lot of times they'll give you some leeway, they'll want to be able to work with you, loan modification, forbearance, all that stuff before it comes to the actual foreclosure process. Now, if you don't make it past anything else in this video, the key point you have to remember is if the owner is still on the deed of the property. So if the landlord or the property owner, whoever is getting foreclosed on, if they are still legally, on the deed of that property, they are the owner. That is who the tenant is legally liable to pay for the monthly rental amount, whatever the agreement is. So whoever the owner of the property is, that is the person that is legally allowed to collect the rent. Doesn't matter if they're in foreclosure or not, doesn't matter if they haven't made a payment in 6 months or 60 months. If their name is on that deed, or their entity, their business, whatever it is, they're the ones that are technically legally the owners of this particular property. Now you might even ask, okay, Mo, well, what happens if there is no lease? Because I had a lease my first year, and then after the first year, my landlord and I had a good relationship, so everything was month to month. even if it's month to month, just for peace of mind, the person that is technically still the owner of that property is the person that is liable to collect your rent. So that is the person that you're technically owing money to in terms of a it's tenant landlord relationship. It doesn't matter if it's month to month or not, because as long as the landlord is the legal owner that is on the deed, if whether they're in foreclosure or not, they still have that right to collect the rent. Now, in instances that I've heard of where the bank might actually have something in their mortgage agreement that says, hey, look, if the landlord or if the owner is foreclosed on, or if we are starting to file the foreclosure process, and if that property is rented out, then the bank is now able to collect that rental amount. Again, this is not something I've personally experienced firsthand directly with any of my clients. It's just something I've heard about. But in some mortgage agreements and some of the contractual agreements in the mortgage, it might say that, hey, if the owner misses their payments 6 months in a row and we start the foreclosure process and that property is rented out, then guess what? The bank steps in and now the tenant is responsible to pay the bank directly that rental amount. The tenant, still can enjoy the home because they have a lease in the property, or maybe if they're month to month, whatever it is. But now the tenant is responsible to pay the bank directly. I want to clarify something here as well, especially if you're a tenant and you're facing this very weird, difficult scenario, which is absolutely not your fault whatsoever. But if you are in the scenario and someone comes to you and says, okay, well, I'm the bank, I represent the bank, and I have to start collecting the rental payments, don't believe it. Don't believe it. Unless you get something in writing that's verified that says, hey, this is the new owner of the property, or this is the person that is now going to be collecting the rental payments, or this is the entity that you should be making your checks or payments out to, then you are still responsible for paying the legal owner of the property, which is the landlord, who may or may not be getting foreclosed on. Now, you might even say, okay, well, how can I be 100% certain that this is how things are going to go? I'm supposed to be paying this new person, or I'm supposed to continue paying the landlord if you find out they're getting foreclosed on. What you could also do, if you know that, or you can foresee that you might even be getting dragged into housing court because there's going to be a case now, whatever it is, what you could do is effectively still pay rent, but put it in a separate account that's controlled by you. That way, if and when, God forbid, you get dragged into court, you can show the judge, hey, look, I didn't know who I was supposed to be paying because I heard the owner's getting foreclosed on. I heard the bank is a new person, but they never sent me a letter, whatever it is. Here's all the rent payments that I'm technically owing the other person in a separate account that I've kept. I can submit it all right now if needed. Then most likely that case will get dismissed. Again, I'm not saying this is exactly how it's going to play out. I'm just saying that this is what you have to keep in mind as a tenant. You are still going to be responsible for rent. Just because the owner is getting foreclosed on doesn't mean the rent's not due anymore, right? Especially if you already have a legal agreement or a lease in place with the current owner that you may or may not have a good relationship with. Those are still, part of your contractual obligations that you have to, maintain or fulfill. With that, I hope you enjoyed this week's video. A little nice, quick, and sweet one for you, which is kind of bizarre if you think about it, how a homeowner or property owner can be foreclosing or going through the foreclosure process with their bank, aka they haven't paid a single payment, but the tenant is still responsible for paying the rent. It's basically like a hack or a cheat for the owner to save money on the mortgage and still collect rent. So it's basically like they're getting double income, right? And then it's up to them if they want to just file bankruptcy or whatever it is and maybe wash their hands of this situation. But the more you know, the better. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'll catch you guys next week. Bye-bye now.